Nottingham Forest went into this match carrying a huge historical weight, with the chance to reach a European semi-final again after decades. Pushed on by a city ground that felt like it was reliving its greatest nights. On the other side was a Porto team that knows the stage well, with more recent pedigree, more knockout game edge, and that familiar aura of a side that never really goes away. It was a night for Forest to show character, and they did. But this is the first point that really matters. Forest deserved to go through, deserved the 1-0 win, and deserved praise for their attitude. But they also deserved criticism for how poorly they managed a situation that should have been exploited far better. There is a difference between respecting Porto and allowing a side with 10 men to keep breathing, keep believing, and keep hanging around the tie as if they were still fully in it. In European knockout football, that is asking for trouble. The match changed very early. Bednarek's red card handed Forest the kind of script every manager dreams of in a game like this: a numerical advantage, a crowd behind them, an early goal, and emotional control of the tie in their own hands. A few minutes later came Morgan Gibbs-White's goal, a strike that took a deflection and wrong-footed Diogo Costa. At that point, the game was asking for one thing: maturity. Maturity to dominate territory, move the ball with more precision, attack the box with more quality, and turn superiority into real control. Forest had some of that, but not enough. And that difference matters, because Forest were intense, aggressive, and they pushed Porto back for long stretches. They won corners, sent balls into the box, filled the attacking third, and made Diogo Costa work. But for all that, their superiority often looked more like volume than true suffocation. And that distinction is important. Volume is when you surround the opponent, shoot often, spend time high up the pitch, and look like the team in charge. Real control is when the opposition almost stops existing, when transitions disappear, when your rest defense is in place, and when the match feels properly caged. Forest had volume. They did not have complete control. Their initial idea was clear enough. Forest wanted to use the extra man to stretch the pitch, attack down the flanks, generate crosses, compete for second balls, and pin Porto back into their own area. Nico Williams was heavily involved in that. Hutchinson gave them width and energy. Gibbs-White drifted well to try and accelerate play between the lines. Diogo Jesus, who came on early after Chris Wood's injury, attacked the box with aggression. The plan made sense. The problem was the execution in the final third. It lacked a bit more clarity, a bit more calm, a bit more precision, and frankly, a bit more ruthlessness, because the chances were there. Hutchinson nearly scored. Diogo Jesus forced a save from Diogo Costa. Nico Williams had an effort blocked almost on the line. Nicolas Dominguez missed a huge headed chance. Then in the second half, Diogo Jesus again found Diogo Costa in his way. So this cannot be framed as Forest failing to create. They did create. What cannot happen is romanticizing wastefulness just because the team won. They won. They deserved to. But they could and should have killed the tie with far less stress. And that is the main point for me. Forest played like the bigger side for most of the night, but they did not manage that superiority like a side mature enough yet. That is a big distinction. When you are facing an opponent like Porto, down to 10 men from so early on, you cannot allow the game to carry that feeling of something could still happen. Forest allowed exactly that. They allowed it with poor finishing. They allowed it by forcing the tempo when it did not need forcing. They allowed it by crossing more than they thought. They allowed it by still giving Porto moments to find depth. They allowed it by keeping the match emotionally open for far too long. And Porto, even with 10 men, did what hardened teams do. They refused to die. That has to be said as well. William Gomez hit the woodwork. Pablo Rosario smashed another effort against the bar late on. They still found moments in transition. There were still spells where Forest, despite the extra man, accepted a game that was more open than it should have been. That does not erase a good Forest performance, but it does serve as a warning. In the latter stages of a European competition, those kinds of concessions can cost you dearly against more clinical sides. Individually, Gibbs-White carried the kind of weight an important player has to carry on a big European night. Not just because of the goal, but because he kept demanding the ball and trying to drive the attacking play forward. Diogo Jesus came into a difficult situation midway through the first half and attacked the area well, competed, got shots away, and stayed involved. Nico Williams was very active in pushing the team on down the flank. Murillo, while he was on the pitch, helped sustain the aggression of Forest's defensive line. But there was also one huge figure on Porto's side, Diogo Costa. And when the opposition's best player, in a game where they are a man down, is the goalkeeper, that should normally be excellent news for the team attacking. The issue is that Forest turned it into dramatic pressure rather than a final verdict. It would also be dishonest to ignore the injuries in the second half. Murillo went down, Hudson-Odoi also had to come off, and that disrupted rhythm, fluency, and even the team's ability to keep pressing with the same organization. But honestly, that explains part of it, not all of it. The sense that the game remained narrow for what Forest were producing had already been there before that. They were the better side, but they took far too long to turn superiority into comfort. And this is where the criticism needs to be clear. A lot of people will look at the 1-0 and say, "Job done. Everything is fine." No, that is exactly the kind of lazy reading that ruins proper football analysis. Things are fine in terms of qualification, fine in terms of attitude, fine in terms of ambition, fine in terms of the competitive weight Forest showed in the tie, but not fine in how they managed their advantage. And if Forest want to go further in this competition, they need to understand something very simple. Big nights do not just demand courage, they demand composure. Forest had plenty of courage. What they lacked was enough composure. At the core of it, this match showed that Nottingham Forest have the soul to compete at this level. They have the stadium, the energy, the aggression, and the players to push a tie in the right direction. But it also showed that this team still flirts with chaos when it could be choosing control. And against a Porto side with 10 men, that is a warning sign, not a minor detail. In the end, Forest deserved applause for the qualification, for the authority they showed in spells, and for the personality they brought to the occasion. But they also come away from this night with an important lesson. It is not enough to be the better side. You have to know how to finish the job. Because when you let a wounded opponent keep standing, you are not showing mercy. You are simply inviting danger back into the game. Now I want to hear from you. Was this Nottingham win more a sign of real competitive strength, or another warning that this side still makes life harder than it needs to in games it should already have put to bed?